Week one of the NFL season's officially here. We got Cowboys Bucks kicking off in just about 2 hours, but we're not here to talk about any of those teams. I mean, by default, if you're a Bears fan, you're going to crown the Bears the 2020 Super Bowl champions because they did end up beating the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I know Max is kind of like rolling his eyes right there, but hey, it is what it is because Bears fans are always going to find a way to go ahead and justify why the Bears are the best team in the NFL. And we certainly hope that that's the case. But what's up, guys? Usaid Kocho and Max Smith here. You can follow us on Twitter at Max Smith ESM and at Usaid Kocho. Max, I'm excited for week one, not because of Andy Dalton, but because something different in the air this year. And it's this guy right above our heads, Justin Fields.
Yeah, I'm excited just because football's back. As we're recording this on Thursday, we have a game to watch tonight. We have Tampa Bay taking on Dak. He's back. There's a lot of good storylines to watch this year. This is just an exciting year if you're a football fan all around. And this is an exciting, probably, but also painful year if you're a Bears fan. So there's just a lot to like this year. We made it. We're back. Football's back. I'm happy. You're happy. Let's get to work.
I mean, I don't know if I'm necessarily happy that the Bears are going to roll into week one with Andy Dalton as a starter. And I get we've kind of sat on this show throughout the summer months and debated who the starting quarterback should be. But one of the things that bothers me is this, okay, is that Matt Nagy says he wants to run this Kansas City offense, or he just wants to like have a Kansas City-esque offense that's explosive, built on speed and big plays. But the problem is you can't do that if your quarterback isn't explosive. It's almost like the Bears are relying on all the wide receivers that they added this offseason, like Marquise Goodwin, Nasimba Webster, Jameer Byrd, to like magically be the reason that the offense just becomes so explosive within the blink of an eye.
Yeah, I mean, I think the concept that speed is what wins games is flawed. It's an easy pitfall to fall into with kind of just how the league has been pointing in the direction. We look at guys like Tyreek Hill, we look at incredibly fast wide receivers, and we look at these smaller wide receivers, and we think, oh, if we have a bunch of those, we're going to win games. No, games are still won and lost at the trenches. They're still won and lost based off of how well your quarterback is able to put the ball in the hands of those speed wide receivers. And they're still won and lost by how well your secondary plays against quarterbacks who can put the ball in the hands of speedy receivers. So there's a lot that Bears fans need to kind of think about before we get super excited and jump ahead of yourself. Like, that's totally fine. Like, that's a good thing about being a fan is you could be incredibly excited about your team. You could be incredibly excited about the prospects of the year. That's totally cool. I totally get that. I'm right there with you. But if you're a fan of the sport, if you're a fan and you're like really into the football and you're really into the Bears, you're like, there are just pieces of this team that aren't there. But of course, there are things that make us excited, like Justin Fields, like some of the rookies. We want to see David Montgomery have a breakout year this year. We want to see Darnell Mooney have a breakout year. We want to see Cole Kmet have a breakout year. We want to see Eddie Jackson return to form. We want to see Robert Quinn actually live up to his contract. We want to see Eddie Goldman have a comeback year. There's all these different storylines that we can follow, which is really exciting as a Bears fan. So even if we don't chalk up a bunch of W's this season, which I personally don't think we're going to, there are still things to watch and look out for. So regardless if you're like the super layman Bears fan who just obviously wants to see us win, or you're the super intense Bears fan who's looking for every little storyline, there's definitely something to watch this season. But the first thing that we're going to watch is Andy Dalton take on the Los Angeles Rams Sunday night. Of course, the NFL loves kicking off the football season with a Sunday night matchup with the Chicago Bears. It's like, 3 years in a row now that they've done this for us, which is nice. As a big market team, they're giving us credit where credit is due. I remember specifically a kickoff against the Packers. That was a good time for a 100th season. Wasn't a great game, but it is what it is. Khalil Mack had a great game. But yeah, I mean, what are you looking forward to specifically from this game? I mean, for me, I'm looking at Andy Dalton primarily, right? I'm seeing, is he our guy? But behind the scenes, I'm looking at this offensive line. Can they perform against Leonard Floyd and Aaron Donald?
Yeah, there's a lot to look at, and I mean, I'm I said this on our weekly podcast, which is available on every podcasting platform. So go check it out. And I'll kind of mention it on YouTube too. It's just that what I'm looking for is, can the Bears slow down what is going to be a more explosive Rams offense? Okay. I know that whenever we think about the Rams, everyone kind of talks about Aaron Donald this, Aaron Donald that. I mean, Jalen Ramsey, Leonard Floyd. Look, the Rams, they're going to have a pretty decent defense, even with Brandon Staley leaving. Okay. It's just Sean McVay knows how to identify talent in his coaching staff, and he's always going to bring in talented coaches. And Sean McVay's kind of philosophy has always just been, hey, no team's going to be more prepared than we are. Now, I'm looking for the Bears to slow down Matt Stafford and the Rams offense, because this first game, it's going to be a very good test to see what this Bears secondary is made of. I mean, we're sitting here recording this on Thursday, September 9th. I think that roster cuts were about a week and a half ago. If the Bears were seriously going to bring in a veteran cornerback or trade for someone, it would have already been done by now. But the fact that they haven't just tells me that they're going to go into LA week 1, probably at home against the Bengals in week 2, and then come home to the Browns in week 3, and basically just see, hey, what do we have in this secondary? Because this secondary right now, you could argue it's the weakest position. Well, not necessarily the secondary because of Eddie Jackson and Tashawn Gibson, which, by the way, I think those two can form a top 10 safety duo in the NFL. I think that more so when we look at these cornerbacks, are these younger guys like Johnson, Vildor, Duke, Shelley, are they going to be able to hold up against a gunslinger like Matthew Stafford? Now, full disclosure here, Bears fans, you are 110% delusional if you think Matt Stafford sucks because he was on the Detroit Lions, okay? He's actually been one of the more consistent quarterbacks in the NFL. I think that any team right now that has Matt Stafford has a chance to make the playoffs every single season. And Matt ultimately is a type of franchise quarterback that could go ahead and elevate every single player around him and make them better. So Matt's going to be the reason that this ball is being distributed to guys like Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Van Jefferson, guys like Gerald Everett, Tyler Higbee. I mean, the Rams have been, from a production standpoint, they've been really efficient on offense last year, and that was more because of scheme than it was talent at the quarterback position. And now that they have a quarterback that can take over games and win, all these players that I just mentioned, like Woods, Kupp, Van Jefferson, they're going to see a significant increase in production.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Rams have been perennial Super Bowl favorites for many analysts for the past consecutive 3 years since they were in the Super Bowl. They're still always in the conversation for what team in the NFC could potentially find themselves playing for the Lombardi. And there's always a group of analysts that say, well, the LA Rams look good. Why is that? It's because of their defense, and it's because of Mr. McVay. It's that simple. They win. They are perennial contenders with Jared Goff. Okay, let's take Goff out of the equation. Let's put in a vastly better quarterback in Matthew Stafford. Now there's really no one out there that would even blink twice if somebody said, yeah, the Rams could go to the Super Bowl this year. Could they win? I don't know. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see the LA Rams and Matthew Stafford goes to the Super Bowl his first year with Sean McVay. And here's another thing that I want to point out. This was a wonderful article published in The Athletic today by Jordan Rodriguez, and it talked about how LA is sharing one of the, if not the best offensive minds in NFL right now with one of, if not the best defensive mind in the NFL right now with Brandon Staley and Sean McVay. They're sharing the same stadium. They're sharing similar facilities, and they're basically talking to each other, competing against each other. And that's going to breed just an immense amount of talent in the scheme between the competing brain trust funds that is Staley and McVay. That was a wonderful article. Definitely go check it out. But that's something that are in the intangibles, because we're so focused on players in this whole kind of media landscape, and as fans, you're so focused on the players. But scheme is incredibly important here, especially when we're talking about Sean McVay, especially when we're talking about the LA Rams. So I also want to bring up that 7 of their returning starting defensive players are gone this year. So their defense might have taken a considerable step back in talent on the roster. But we have to see their schemes. We have to see exactly how well McVay is able to, and his defensive coordinators are able to utilize what they have. Because if there's anything that makes the Rams, it's utilizing who they have and where they have them. that's just a testament to the head coaching, just genius that is Sean McVay. So down the line, week 1, couple of days, we're going to see potentially an amazing offense, probably maybe one of the best offenses that we've seen, especially at week 1, right? Week 1, you expect things to be a little slow. You expect things to kind of get in the rhythm and the motion. I'm not expecting that from the Rams. I'm expecting them to go out guns blazing. And the fact that we have Sean Desai going up into the booth to call plays is fantastic. Thank you so much, because what can you do when you're up there? You can read what your secondary is doing wrong. It's a lot easier to defend against the passing game when you're up with a Hawkeye's view of exactly where am I getting beat and what do I need to do to make adjustments. That is fantastic. Thank you so much. Very happy about that. Thank you so much, Mr. Desai. But yeah, I mean, you're completely right. The Rams don't have a bunch of household names. They don't have a bunch of home run hitters, but they're always going to be one of the playoff teams that are in contention for the Super Bowl just because of the schemes and the coaching staff.
Yeah, and there's two things that need to consistently happen for your NFL franchise to keep churning forward. Is you have to be able to adapt, but also then be able to innovate. And Sean McVay has continuously showed over the years that he's going to adapt, but also innovate. I mean, 2017 was his first season in LA, and then 2018 kind of the entire scheme as a whole just really took off. And I attributed a lot of the talent, such as a Todd Gurley, who was the best NFL running back that year by a wide margin, and guys like Brandon Cooks being the reason that Jared Goff had an MVP candidate, because that's legitimately what happened. But then those guys are no longer there, and then 2019 kind of the Rams struggled. They limped to the finish line. It wasn't necessarily a terrible year, but there was a point where throughout week 7 or 8 of the season, I mean, the Bears were in LA playing the Rams, and then Sean McVay's team adjusted, Matt Nagy's team didn't adjust, and Sean McVay came out on top. And now 2020, we saw the same thing again. And now going into 2021, I mean, they've upgraded talent at certain positions, mainly QB, like I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. And so ultimately, you know that the scheme is going to make the rest of the players just look so much better. And so what it is with Sean McVay, I mean, do people kind of look at him as this offensive genius? Yeah. Did everyone kind of assume and say, oh, well, it's only going to take 1 or 2 times for a defensive coordinator to completely crack the scheme open? Yeah. And McVay's scheme, by the way, was cracked in 2018 when the Bears hosted the Rams on Sunday Night Football. But then what happened is Sean kind of adjusted, and from there on out, the entire thing's been lights out. And then on the other side of the ball, I mean, you look at, the Bears defense. Sean needs to sit up there in the coach's booth and really look at the all-22 view of the game, because he simply knows that, hey, listen, these DBs right now, I'm going to be asked to do more with less. And ultimately, that's going to be the theme for the cornerback room this season is, hey, who are the players that are going to be doing more with a lot less talent? We wouldn't be as concerned about the Bears cornerback room had Kyle Fuller still been here, or had a guy like Steven Nelson been signed. But it's tough to replace a guy that's a first-team All-Pro and then a 2-time Pro Bowler as well. And then switching over here to the Bears offense, man, I mean, what exactly are you looking for, especially scheme-wise? Because you know that the Bears with Bill Lazor and Matt Nagy and Andy Dalton, a 3-headed monster, as I like to joke around and say, they're going to be running a lot of similar concepts that were run in the Mitch Trubisky offense last year.
Yeah, what I'm specifically looking at is why do we have 5 tight ends on the roster? And I want to see if Jesper Horst and JP Holtz are utilized in any way, shape, or form, either than special teams. And this offensive personnel, I'm going to be really interested in seeing how dedicated we are in sticking to 11 personnel. I think I'm going to be looking at a lot of personnel groupings. Specifically, I'm going to be looking at where exactly are wide receivers lining up off the ball, on the ball, because we really don't know who's going to line up where and what's going to happen with the amount of speed that we have. Who's going to be the X, who's going to be the Z, who's going to be the Y. We have general ideas, but we won't know until until the first snap, obviously. I'm also going to be looking forward to the offensive line. I'm going to be looking at specifically Sam Mustipher. We want to see how he holds up against Aaron Donald. He didn't have a terrible game against Aaron Donald last year. He wasn't great, but let's see how he performs against them this year. Let's see how our tackles perform. I'm interested in seeing how Jason Peters puts a game together. We'll see how that happens. And I'm looking forward to David Montgomery kind of showing and improving upon what he was able to put together last year. I'm not anticipating a lot of play action. We might be able to get there if the ground game opens up for Andy Dalton, but I'm anticipating a good amount of gun, good amount of 11 personnel, and kind of just really simple, like you mentioned, really simple routes that we saw a lot of last year. And Matt Nagy's calling the plays, so expect to be a little upset at multiple play calls throughout the game.
Yeah, see, the play calling is very interesting because every single time that it comes up, everyone kind of looks at it and is just like, oh my God, this is the worst thing on the planet. I also think that sometimes fans, because a certain play doesn't work, as I also tweet out the Bears jersey schedule here. I mean, what tends to happen is that fans will go and they'll be like, okay, bubble screen was called, it didn't work. Sometimes the play call is just a simple matter of like a numbers game, for example. Okay. Now, the reason it doesn't work is because the Bears just aren't talented enough. When you look at play calling, my whole opinion is that Matt, you've talked about self-reflection all offseason. You say every single year you're going to try and grow as a head coach and as an evaluator. Well, if that's the case, you can call plays for the first 3 or 4 games. But if things aren't working, then the ideal scenario, and again, this is the ideal scenario, if the Matt Nagy play calling isn't working after 3 or 4 games, you hand it over to Bill Lazor and see what he can do. Because Andy Dalton did play some of his best football under Bill Lazor. Was Andy a quarterback that blew things away by any means? Absolutely not. But he still was efficient and productive enough to kind of get the job done. And the Bears, again, they're not looking, nobody wants, and it would be an ideal scenario if Andy Dalton lit the world on fire. That would be great, okay? The only bad thing about it was that Justin Fields, the quarterback that every Bears fan only cares about, would be sitting on the bench the entire season. But then at the end of the day, if Andy Dalton does good, then you know what? The Bears are going to be happy. Fans are going to be happy. But if it doesn't happen, then you have to look into handing things over to Bill Lazor. But the problem, and this is where the reality comes into focus, the problem is I don't think Matt Nagy's ever going to hand over play calling this season, because you know that as soon as things start struggling, he's going to throw Andy Dalton under the bus, switch over to Justin Fields, and then what will happen is he's just going to be calling plays for Justin Fields.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Matt Nagy's kind of make it or break it year, specifically in the league. If it doesn't pan out with the Chicago Bears, at least this year could salvage his reputation for other teams that are potentially looking to bring in a head coach. Matt Nagy knows that. He knows that, well, I'm not trying to John Fox my career here, or that I'm never going to be able to coach for the rest of my career because of how badly I screwed up a year. If things happen, he needs to throw somebody under the bus to make him look good for a potential job down the line. He's going to do that. And honestly, I don't necessarily blame him for that. As a person, I get it. Sometimes you got to save your own skin. But what I do blame is him putting himself in the scenario that he's currently facing. And obviously this all could have been avoided years ago if he would have genuinely put it time, effort, and didn't throw Mitch Trubisky under the bus like he did multiple times. And anyways, I could talk about the whole Mitch debacle for hours. But essentially, to wrap everything up here, against the Los Angeles Rams, Chicago Bears, week 1, we're incredibly excited. We're looking at a bunch of different things. We're looking at the offensive line. How does it perform? We're looking at our defensive backs. How do they perform? We're looking at our defensive schemes, coaches their size, first year. We're looking at how does Andy Dalton perform? We're not booing Andy Dalton, by the way. I hope us as Chicago Bears fans aren't rooting for Andy Dalton's failure, because that means the Chicago Bears failure. So we're looking to see how Andy performs. We're not going to call for his head the second he makes one bad play. We're looking forward to seeing how Cole Kmet develops along with the youth, good young core of this team. And yeah, we're looking at how the Rams look, because they very much well could be playing for the Lombardi here in January, depending on how things go.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and give a quick score prediction. I mean, I think it's going to be Rams 24, Bears 17. When you look at the nature of this matchup, it's just going to come down to, hey, can this Chicago secondary continue to hold up against the Rams? Now, things are drastically going to change over the next couple weeks in terms of what this Bears team really is. But I think that this, if anything, I mean, the silver lining in playing an explosive team with a good trio of wide receivers first is that you're able to kind of see, hey, what is this secondary good at in an actual full speed NFL game versus just what are they not good at?
Yeah, for sure. And also, remember the Super Bowl is played in SoFi Stadium this year, so LA could be playing at home. Anyways, we could see another Tampa Bay scenario. But outside of that, thank you guys so much for staying or watching. My quick score prediction, I think it's going to be a little bit less high scoring than we think. I'm going to give it a solid 14-10. Rams are going to come out on top. I think it's really going to be a clash of defenses here. And I honestly don't see us putting more than 10 points on the board just because I don't have enough trust in this offense.
That's going to do it from us, guys. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at MaxSmithySM and at Usaid Kosho. We'll be back, I think, Monday or Tuesday to recap the game. Enjoy the weekend. Stay safe. And as always, bear down, but don't get too mad if things don't fall in your favor. But for the Bears and Hunger Games, may the odds be ever in your favor for Mr. Andy Dalton. But peace out, guys.